Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 5th, 2024, and today we have some breaking news out of the United States Senate in which Senator Kyrsten Sinema from the state of Arizona will not run for re-election in this election cycle. She announced on her social channels and through a press release less than 30 minutes ago, stating that she will not run for re-election and that she will leave the United States Senate at the end of this year. Kyrsten Sinema's announcement comes as a major victory for Democrats as they look ahead to the November elections and look to the 2024 Senate elections that arguably they have been dreading for quite some time. And the reason for that is because taking a look at where we are in terms of current composition in the United States Senate, Republicans have the upper hand when it comes down to the states that Democrats currently control and where Republicans can make major advancements in. States like Montana and West Virginia and Ohio currently have Democratic incumbents, and Republicans are looking to them this cycle to win in 2024. But of course, it wasn't just contained to Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Republicans are already expected to win the state of West Virginia, and this is where I'm at in terms of my Senate prediction for 2024. But Arizona has absolutely been a point of interest for quite some time. This is one of the states that we can truly determine to be a toss-up, or at least in the idea of a three-way race was a lot more competitive than I think it might actually end up being, even if the margin is roughly the same. Because for a long period of time, there was heavy conversation around whether or not Kyrsten Sinema was in fact going to run. She was endorsed by Lisa Murkowski, by Meghan McCain, and had been given a huge, bump up by speculation in terms of punditry, in terms of polling. People were assuming that Kyrsten Sinema was just waiting to announce her bid to run for her election. And honestly, it made a lot of sense. Looking at the backstory of Kyrsten Sinema in 2018 when she won her first Senate race here. Let me see if I can pull it up. I should be able right here. When she defeated Martha McSally, she was a lesser-known congresswoman from the state of Arizona, had not made major headways when it came down to Arizona politics. And so when she won the Democratic nomination, a lot of Democrats were looking to her as a beacon of hope, as a rising star in the Arizona Democratic Party, and potentially a rising star on the national stage. And that ended up happening. She became very prominent, very, very well respected, but then came her reluctance to back President Biden and the Democratic Party on crucial and key votes related to the filibuster, related to appointees, related to a number of, acts related to budget reconciliation, trying to change the minimum wage. A lot of these things that Democrats tried to run through with their very, very slim majority. At the time was 50-50, with Vice President Harris breaking the tie. Kyrsten Sinema teamed up with Joe Manchin more often than not and decided to pull away. And so then she decided to leave the Democratic Party entirely. She announced that she'd be switching over as an independent, and a lot of people saw this as a further indication that she was going to run for United States Senate. And I honestly bought into that narrative, because the reason we saw her leave the Democratic Party, at least from what we had expected, was that she was on track to lose the Democratic primary in the state of Arizona. You saw that Ruben Gallego was receiving many, many endorsements and had been receiving far higher polling numbers than Kyrsten Sinema was, even in a head-to-head matchup as an incumbent Democrat. By the time October of 2021 came around, her approval rating amongst Republicans was rivaling that amongst Democrats. And so from that point onward, we knew that Kyrsten Sinema was not going to win a Democratic primary. And you might be thinking, okay, maybe, that argument makes sense, but wouldn't she just run as an independent if she lost the Democratic primary? The answer is no. Arizona has what we call a sore loser law, where if you lose a primary, a partisan primary, you cannot switch over to be an independent and run on that same ballot. It prevents people from trying to vote split because they're upset about how a party went on. When you looked back at the 2022 governor's race, there was conversation about whether or not Karen Taylor Robson should switch over as an independent and fracture the vote there because Kari Lake was a threat to Arizona. And that was a lot of conversation, but we knew from the beginning that simply wouldn't be happening. There also was that conversation if Kari Lake was to lose the nomination back in 22, would she have switched over and ran as an independent? Again, it just simply wasn't possible. And so when Kyrsten Sinema moved over to be an independent, it looked like it was, a preemptive step at allowing her to be on the ballot, that it would give her time to gather the signatures. Arguably, not many signatures are necessary as an independent in Arizona to end up on a statewide ballot, and so people thought that it was possible. Well, at the end of this month is when signatures are due for independent candidates, and we were expecting an announcement soon, either that she was going to run or that she wasn't going to run. And so for a long time, we've been treating it, including the polls. You can see here on Real Clear Politics that they've been doing three-way race polls between Sinema, Lake, and Gallego, and you found that the vote did in fact fracture, but the last place candidate every single time, more often than not, actually no, every single time, was Kyrsten Sinema. And so the pathways forward for her reelection really didn't seem to be existing in the Democratic Party, really did not seem to be existing as an independent. And so then came the question, does she decide to run or does she take a step back from the U.S. Senate? And it looks like she chose to take a step back. In this decision not to run for re-election, Kyrsten Sinema has cleared a pathway for Democrats when it comes down to the Senate race here. While the three-way race still showed Democrats winning the Arizona Senate race by 4.5%, Democrats are happy that Kari Lake has been chosen, handpicked even, by the National Republican Party as the, presumptive nominee in this 2024 race. She's received the endorsement from numerous U.S. senators. She's received the endorsement from President Trump. She's received the endorsement from known figures in the Arizona GOP like Wendy Rogers and Blake Masters in this Senate race. And she's running against Mark Lamb, who a year ago she had endorsed for the United States Senate race until she decided that she wanted it for herself. But Kari Lake's name should ring a bell, because when you take a look at her electoral history, it isn't super strong. She ran for governor back in 2022. We can actually pull this up here because she ran against Katie Hobbs. The interesting thing about the Arizona governor's race is that the polls had predicted that Kari Lake was going to win by 3.5%. A Democratic firm had Republicans up by 4, a Republican firm had Republicans up by 4, and the average was Kari Lake plus 4%. And throughout the entirety of the campaign season, after September 9th, Democrats were losing in the head-to-head average. Kari Lake had been at the highest point she had ever been in polls on Election Day, and she ended up losing. The problem here was that Kari Lake had branded herself as a far-right Republican. She refused to accept the results of the elections. She made drag queens the prominent part of her campaign that she was vehemently opposed to. She leaned into all of the social issues that Republicans just simply, based on electability history, right, based on electoral history, should not be leaning into as heavily as they do, and it resulted in Katie Hobbs, who refused to debate Kari Lake, who barely held any public events, ended up with her winning the Arizona governorship. And guess what she did after losing the race? She refused to concede. And to this day, she says there was fraud in Arizona, which is why she lost the race. There was fraud in the same way that Donald Trump's election was stolen in the state of Arizona. She perpetuated the same falsehoods that did not resonate with voters back in 2022 on the Senate level, on the House level, and clearly on the governor level. But also, opinion polls showed after Trump had left office that these election lies were not popular, not good for the Arizona Republican Party, and then tens of millions of dollars spent auditing Maricopa County, Republican-led investigations by the state Senate that came up and found absolutely nothing were all very bad looks for the Arizona GOP. And the very big instigator, perpetuator of these falsehoods was Kari Lake. And so when she came to the ballot box and people were voting on Election Day, I think a lot of them may not have known Katie Hobbs, but just simply didn't want it to be Kari Lake. She turned off so many voters that in a year where the popular vote swung by 11 points to the right compared to 2020 and 8 points to the right, 2018, 8 points to the right of 2020 in just 2 years, Arizona voted for Katie Hobbs more than Joe Biden won in that state. Democrats lost the popular vote to the Republicans by 3 points nationwide. Biden won it by 5. And yet Arizona somehow shifted left. It also happened in the Senate elections here. Blake Masters was cut from the same cloth as Kari Lake. Both of them adopted the same ideologies, were endorsed by Donald Trump, and that ended up being their kiss of death when it came to Election Day. Because although it helped them get through a primary, the same way it's helping Kari Lake get through this primary, voters did not like either of them. Blake Masters lost by 5, Kari Lake lost an honestly very, very winnable race. Arizona has had a strong history of electing Democrats. You can even take a look at 2018 when Kyrsten Sinema won her Senate race by around 2.4%. Doug Ducey defeated his opponent by 14.2%. 4 years prior, the state of Arizona had gone to Doug Ducey by 11.8%. In 2010, we saw that the Republicans won here by 12 points. In 2006, though, was the last time it went blue, and that was a blue wave year. And so it took a huge blue wave year in which Wyoming was safe blue, Oklahoma was safe blue. Tennessee was safe blue. These are states that today stand to be solid conservative states. Arizona, that was the last time it went blue before Katie Hobbs, and now it's a state that does lean a little bit more towards the left, which is exactly why Kari Lake being on this ballot head-to-head is so good for Democrats. Because now you know Kari Lake is a toxic name in Arizona. She's trying to pivot more towards the center, especially when they thought there was going to be a three-way race and you needed to peel off independents, but now it's going to be exactly what it was in 2022. Katie Hobbs and Ruben Gallego are very similar. They don't have major names across the state and they aren't as well known, but that honestly helps them in this case. He is seen as the alternative to what voters rejected just 2 years prior. A crazy alternative in the eyes of many voters, and something that the Arizona GOP just simply cannot afford to have her renominated. The only problem was that when she immediately announced her bid for the 2024 Senate race, she received many endorsements from many notable Republicans across the state, across the country, including President Donald Trump. And it made it so it was nearly impossible for any other Republican to announce that they were going to run. A great choice would have been Governor Doug Ducey, who again won his re-election in 2018 by 14 points. Another great choice would have been Karen Taylor Robson, who ran for governor in 2022, lost to Kari Lake, but was perfectly slated to win the general election. Had it been Karen Taylor Robson, Arizona would still be a red state. Kari Lake is a poison to the Arizona GOP. And the quicker they realize that, the quicker that this election will flip red. That's the problem here for Arizona Republicans, because what they have tried to do is take a page out of the Trump playbook when he was the worst performing Republican in the state of Arizona in over 2 decades. I mean, you are quite literally talking about the last time Arizona going blue in 1996, and that's because Bill Clinton won a plurality of voters in that race. In 2020, Biden did win a plurality, but was much closer to a majority. But Trump's margin was nowhere near what we saw for the victories in Bush twice, for McCain, and for Romney. In 2000 flat, Bush won by 6.3. In 2004, he won by 11. In 2008, McCain won by 9. And in 2012, Romney won by 9. And so you see here that the lowest performing margin, I mean, even if you date back before then, you take a look at 92, Bush won here against Clinton in his electoral victory landslide. In 1988, Bush won here by 21.2%. Reagan won here by 33.9%. I mean, it historically has always been a very, very Republican state until 1996, when it only flipped because of the vote splitting with Ross Perot and Bob Dole being on the ballot. And for it to have happened in 2020, the warning sign was here in 2016, Trump won by just 3.5%. And so when Hillary Clinton was losing the Rust Belt and Ohio and Iowa and Florida and losing all the states she was predicted to win, like North Carolina, right, and Maine's 2nd district, Arizona shifted to the left by roughly 6 points. That's big for Democrats. It's good for Democrats. And when you take a look at what you have found with Donald Trump copycats in 18, in 20, in 22 is that they consistently lose. And now that Kyrsten Sinema has cleared the field for a head-to-head race between Ruben Gallego, between Kari Lake, I have no doubt in my mind that this bolsters the Democratic Party's ability to win in this race, in this Senate race, and does them a lot of good. Now that Ruben Gallego is practically unopposed when it comes down to this primary, raising over $10 million, Kari Lake, who is struggling to raise money, and despite all of these endorsements, is still in a primary where she may not even get more than just 55% of the vote. What I think we will find here is that similarly to 2022, these polls will be taken with caution. That Kari Lake has led in polls before, and it has not translated to a victory in actuality. And now that Ruben Gallego is certainly giving her a run for her money, literally, and now, in many other regards, now that it's a head-to-head race, I would be, much more cautious if I was a Republican in Arizona. Because this race that was meant to be one of the most competitive may end up leaning towards the Democratic Party, given that voters really, really do not like Kari Lake and have rejected her once, and I do not doubt that they would reject her again. And so the final takeaway here is that with Kyrsten Sinema out of the race, Democrats stand to be in a much better position in this competitive state. It's going to be exceptionally close on the presidential, in many congressional races, and this being no different. The Senate race might be close, but the odds at which Democrats win them by do not seem to be following suit. I do believe Ruben Gallego in a head-to-head race will beat Kari Lake, and this state will flip from what was an independent who caucused with the Democrats to being a solid Democratic state, and Ruben Gallego, who was arguably much more progressive-leaning than Kyrsten Sinema, might be making major moves when it comes down to the United States Senate. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.